Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for waiting. Welcome to the 9th Global Interactive Forum on Traffic and Safety, Traffic Culture for Sustainable Society, proudly hosted by the International Association of the Traffic and Safety Sciences. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. First, on behalf of the host, Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, the International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences President, will give opening remarks. President Takeuchi, please.
Good afternoon to those who are attending physically here in Tokyo, and good day for those who are attending virtually through online. My name is Kazuhiko Takeuchi. I'm a president of International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences, so-called IATSS. In opening this global interactive forum on traffic and safety, in short, it's called GIFTS. I would like to make the opening remarks. This symposium is a hybrid conference, as I already mentioned, combining our physical and virtual conferences. I would like to express my sincere thanks to those who could attend either physically or virtually to this forum. IATSS, International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences, was established in 1974, which aims to achieve the desirable traffic society. And next year, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the IATSS. The global traffic environment is in a period of a major transition, and there has been increasing demand for approaches to problems that use practical efforts that combine various fields in a complex manner. These efforts include not only responses to reduce traffic accident fatalities, but also response to technological innovation that center on carbon neutrality, well-being, and information and communication technology. End of this week, I will fly to Dubai to attend the COP28 of the Convention on Climate Change, which is very, very important for the humankind, how we could reduce the CO2 emissions to achieve the net zero by the year 2050. It is also becoming increasingly important to examine the role of traffic by considering the characteristics of each country or region, as well as the diverse cultural backgrounds of people. We are now calling it as a traffic culture. And this is the center of a discussion that we will develop in this forum. Based on these perspectives, our association emphasizes transdisciplinarity positioned across our activities that include the participation of experts from a wide range of fields, in addition to experts in traffic and safety. Not only domain of the scientists, but also all the stakeholders and the participants focus on the respective positioning of transdisciplinarity. We need to connect between academic science and the real world and society to co-creation of the desirable society. We previously used interdisciplinarity, but in order to keep a closer relationship with the society, we are now calling the transdisciplinary approach, which aims to combine the scientific community with the real society to move forward. As part of this, we have hosted the Global Interactive Forum on Traffic and Safety, or GIFTS, annually since 2015, with the aim of achieving sustainable and desirable traffic society. For this year, the 9th forum, the theme is Traffic Culture for Sustainable Society. Experts from Japan and overseas, we have 3 distinguished participants from overseas, Mr. Nicholas Ward, Ms. Lotte Blondam, and Ms. Linda Wells. Welcome to our forum, and welcome to Japan. We look forward to your very active participation in these discussions and activities. Please enjoy the forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Takeuchi. Now, Professor Akihiro Nakamura, Chairman, the International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences International Forum Committee, will give us the introduction of today's symposium. Professor Nakamura, please.
Okay, thank you for introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. On behalf of the GIFT Executive Committees, I would like to express our gratitude to you all here and to our online audience. Yeah, as President Takeuchi Sensei mentioned now, we IATSS value the perspectives of transdisciplinarity. We believe it's really important for everyone involved in transportation society, such as government, industry, and private citizens, to work together toward the realization of ideal transportation society. With the aim of promoting transdisciplinary effort, we have held this symposium every year since 2014. So this is our 9th gift. Actually, we started, as President Takeuchi mentioned, next year, we celebrate 50th anniversary. So actually, we started this gift 9 years ago. So that's why this is the ninth gift. So that time was our 40th anniversary. Then we have 8 gifts so far. So we originally started this forum as a platform to discuss how we should work toward the realization of an ideal transportation society. Now our 50th anniversary is approaching. So we believe that it's really important to look much further into the future. So with this in mind, we have chosen the theme of this year's symposium as transportation culture for a sustainable society. In this year's forum, we would like to consider what can be done from the field of mobility in building a sustainable society. Here, we are inviting 2 keynote speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Nicholas J. Ward. He is a professor emeritus of Montana State University and also a senior principal scientist of Leidos, which is a consultancy company. He has 30 years of experience in the field of traffic safety as an expert in the safe system approach. His speech title is Changing Traffic Safety Culture. He will be followed by another keynote speech on Use Evidence and Find Your Friends for Sustainable Cities by Ms. Lotte Brondam. She has led the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety since 2014. The Alliance represents the voice of NGOs and mobilized its 340 member NGOs in over 100 countries. I myself look forward to hearing valuable insights both from academia and practice. Following the keynote speech, we will have a panel discussion. The moderator of the panel is Professor Managi of Kyushu University, who is an IATSS member. Dr. Managi has played many important roles in the environmental field for the United Nations and other international organizations. We invite two keynote speakers into the panel also, and also the additional two panelists will join us. Professor Kitamura of the University of Tokyo will join the panel. He is also an IATSS member. He is specialized in comparative education and has been conducting his research extensively on education policy of developing countries. In addition to the environmental field, education is a very important area when considering sustainability. Last but not least, the other panelist is Ms. Linda Wells. She is a director of MDS Traffic Planners and Consultants, which is a leading transportation consultancy firm based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In addition, her participation as a panelist today has very special meaning for us. IATSS has been providing a leadership training program to develop young ASEAN leaders for nearly 40 years. It is known as IATSS Forum. The program was created by the will of Mr. Soichiro Honda, a founder of Honda Motors. Ms. Linda Wells is one of the alumni of this program. We are very proud to have IATSS Forum alumni participating in this forum to discuss the future of global mobility. As a previous symposium, this year's gift aimed to create new knowledge and collaboration between academia and practice. We look forward to seeing lively and free interaction. Although our time will be limited, I hope that everyone here will find our gathering today meaningful. With this wish, I would like to conclude my explanation of today's symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nakamura. Next, we would like to move on to the lectures. This year, we invited two lectures. First, we would like to welcome Professor Nicholas J. Ward, Professor Emeritus of Montana State University and Senior Principal Scientist of Leidos. Professor Ward, please.
Konnichiwa. Thank you for having me here. Very important conference and one of the best organized conferences I've been to as well. So congratulations to everybody involved in organizing today's event. Also very pleased to be back in one of my favorite cities, Tokyo. It's worth the jet lag to come here and enjoy it. So thank you for the invitation, and I hope we can have a good discussion today about all the topics we're covering. I'll be talking about traffic safety culture, which is a specific aspect of traffic culture, focusing on engaging risky or safe behaviors that affects traffic fatalities. Traffic safety is a key component to a sustainable society with the goal of reaching 0 fatalities and serious injuries in our communities. When we talk about traffic safety, we don't talk about accidents, we talk about crashes. Accidents implies that these events are unpredictable or random or outside of our control. The use of the word crash is important because it implies it's predictable. There are known factors. We can anticipate when crashes are more likely, and we can therefore proactively engage in strategies to make our roadways safer by understanding these factors. Traditionally, when we approach traffic safety, there's several approaches, several disciplinary frameworks for how we approach traffic safety. One is engineering, where we can think of road users like trains. If we just built a better infrastructure, they're going to be safer. So the focus there is on infrastructure design to create safe behaviors. An example here, speed bumps as an infrastructure solution to force safer driving, slower speeds. Unfortunately, that's not the complete answer because people will speed up after the speed bump, so it's not a permanent, sustainable solution. Another typical approach is enforcement. From that perspective, we believe that people are inherently likely to make errors, to take risks, and we introduce enforcement to prevent that behavior from happening. Unfortunately, in many societies, enforcement isn't liked, it isn't very popular, so there's some resistance to the levels of enforcement that's sometimes necessary to achieve that goal. Here's an example from the UK where a speed camera sign has been vandalized to show disdain with this particular technology because it's seen as generating money for the government rather than being a safety technology. The other big approach is education, where we see road users in some senses being programmable. If they only had the right skills and the right knowledge, they're going to be safer. Well, we know that's not completely true either. If we look at this data here from factors contributing to fatal crashes in terms of the human factor, what the human did or didn't do, we see that skill, performance errors, not being able to operate the vehicle is only about 11% of fatalities. The skills we learn from driving schools and driving education is necessary, but it doesn't assure safety. We see instead that recognition errors, not seeing the hazards, or decision errors, deciding to take a risk, deciding to speed, are much more prevalent as reasons for traffic fatalities. The question is, why is that? Why are we making decisions that are risky? And the thesis of my presentation today is that it's our culture that contributes to our decisions to be safe or to be risky. The whole basis of talking about culture as a framework for understanding road user behavior is to recognize that human beings are inherently social beings. Our self-identity is attached to the groups we belong to. The groups that are important to us emotionally help form our identity, and by being in those groups, socialized within those groups, we acquire the culture that characterizes that group, and we make decisions which reflect, which are consistent with that culture. So we're very much influenced by our social environment. And I think in traffic safety, unlike other public health domains who already know this, we tend to ignore the influence of our social environment on the decisions we make as road users and as traffic safety stakeholders. For example, we know that speeding is a serious crash factor, but just look at the social media. How much is speed presented in car commercials and in movies as being something sexy or heroic or desirable? That's the social environment. So on the one hand, we're communicating that speed is a good thing when we're trying to enforce and reduce speed as part of traffic safety. Being social beings, we make decisions based on our social environment. Until we understand the social environment and change it to reinforce safety, we're not going to have sustainable traffic safety goals met. As social beings, it's very important to our sense of self-identity that we belong to defined groups that define our identity. As social beings, we feel very emotional about the groups we belong to. It's important to us, and we engage in behaviors based on how we think it will affect our membership in those groups. Consequently, we're inherently motivated to do things that lead to acceptance by the groups that are important to us, and we try and avoid things that lead to rejection from the groups that are important to us. In fact, there's been interesting brain study research showing that being rejected socially by a group that's important to you activates the same part of your brain that lights up when you feel physical pain. So the brain reacts to rejection from social groups, much like physical pain. Consequently, we can use these social motivations to help nudge behavior toward the safer road user behaviors that we need for zero fatalities. This is an example of an ad produced in the public health sector for smoking. I'm including it for you to see an example of a strategy that tries to change behavior to something healthier by playing on this idea of social motivations linked to belonging to groups. How do I press that to play the video? Proceed.
If you're thinking about quitting, you don't have to do it alone. Call 13QUIT. Authorised by the Queensland Government, Brisbane.
So in that example, you can see they're trying to motivate behavior change to encourage not smoking by tying it to the social rejection that people inherently don't like. No one liked being picked last at recess to play on a team. No one likes rejection. It's better to also think about how can we create campaigns that promote support from the groups important to us when we do engage in the behavior we want to see. So if we're going to talk about traffic safety culture, we need to start with a definition of what we mean. If we're going to work together on this topic, we need to agree on a definition. And this is one definition used in my work back at Montana State University, where we define culture in terms of the shared values and beliefs that define a group's identity. So here we're using traffic safety culture defined as the shared values and beliefs that influence our behavioral choices as road users and as traffic safety stakeholders that can affect traffic safety. We'll start talking about traffic safety culture as it relates to influencing road user behavior. And if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about how traffic safety culture can be used to relate to actions and behaviors that traffic safety stakeholder organizations can take on behalf of road users. Once we have a definition, we need a model to operationalize what we mean by traffic safety culture. This is the model that we use based on several psychological theories of decision-making that humans make. The theory of planned behavior, prototype willingness model, and a few others combine together to show the different values and beliefs together called a belief system, which influences people's willingness and intention to engage in either risky or safe behavior. We can then use this model to measure traffic safety. We can either develop interview questions or survey questions that measure each of the boxes, so we can quantify traffic safety culture and also analyze which of the boxes have the strongest influence on the decision to be risky or unsafe. Once we know that, we can target those boxes to develop strategies to change culture in a way that the safe choice is the culturally appropriate choice. So here are some examples of using the model to develop strategies to change culture and ultimately to change behavior. And because we're changing culture, who we are, these changes in behavior are sustainable. They're enduring because they are now part of our group's identity that persists into the future. So the first is to change attitudes towards the behavior, whether we feel positively or negatively toward the behavior. And to do that, we need to change behavioral beliefs. Behavioral beliefs are our beliefs about the consequences of engaging in a behavior. Are there benefits or are there costs? Typically, when we use this as a strategy framework, we focus on identifying the physical costs of engaging in risky behavior. You may be severely injured. You may injure someone else. We also focus on financial costs. If you engage in the risky behavior, you may be caught by the police and have to pay a fine. When we're focusing on traffic safety culture as a framework for creating safer behaviors, we also need to communicate and develop strategies that focus on the social consequences of doing the dangerous thing. In this example, it's talking about someone who felt too embarrassed to ask for a ride home when they were drunk and are now more embarrassed because they got caught by the police and have a DUI. So thinking about how do we use strategies based in the social consequences that reject the behaviors that our society is not willing to accept. Moving to the middle of the model now, we can talk about prototypical images. Prototypical images are our attitudes about the people we think always do the behavior or never do the behavior. So these are our beliefs about the people we think always speed or never wear their seatbelt. Is it a positive image or a negative image? If it's a positive image, we're more likely to do that behavior too, because we want to be like them. So there we need to change normative beliefs that lead to the prototypical image. Here's an example from Montana, where I used to live. Trying to take the positive image of rodeo champions in a Native American Indian community and associating it with the desired behavior of wearing a seatbelt. In their culture, being a good horse rider is very high social status. Winning the rodeo and winning a belt that you're the rodeo champion is like the ultimate in social status. So now they're combining that with wearing a seatbelt to make it desirable to also wear a belt. We can also talk about norms, what we think most people do in our group and what most people expect us to do in our group. And we can create strategies around those normative beliefs. And what's important when we talk about norms is perception is reality. We don't always know what the actual norm is in our group. It's our perception of what's normal that influences our decision making. So here's an example from a study we did in Minnesota, where we surveyed Minnesota's traffic safety culture, and 15% of Minnesota residents said they sped often. So only 15% of that population sped more than half the time, frequently sped. So the actual norm for speeding is very small. But when we ask people how much do they think other people in Minnesota speed, the perceived norm, what they thought was normal for Minnesota, 70% said everyone else speeds most of the time. So there's a mismatch between the two norms. The perceived norm makes it sound like speeding is normal. The actual norm, it's not. But people react to the perceived norm. So it's important because the people who thought it was normal to speed were 10 times more likely to speed themselves. Their perception was an important influence. So a strategy here is to correct the misperception, to close the gap between the perceived norm and the actual norm. Here's an example, not of speeding, but of seatbelts, where people in Montana thought most people didn't wear their seatbelt. Well, 75% did. Most people do. The actual norm is very good. It's a positive norm. It's a norm about doing the safe thing. So you correct the misperception by putting out the factual information out there in the community, which celebrates something positive. We are a safe community. The last part I want to talk about is perceived control, having the belief we have control over our behaviors, that we can do the safe thing. And in this example, I'm going to take a shift. In traffic safety in general, we try and get individuals to take behavioral choices that are safer for them. In traffic safety culture, we want people to take actions that help others be safe too. We want to create campaigns and strategies that not only ensure I am going to do the safe thing on the road, But also, I'm going to take action that encourages other people that are important to me in my groups. I want them to be safe as well. This is a New Zealand commercial showing a young New Zealand boy thinking in his head, can he ask his friend not to drive home drunk? It's a commercial to try and show we can say this, we can make these requests, we can ask someone important to us to be safer.
Oh no, George is driving. He's too wasted. I should say something, but I could look dumb in front of Monique. Bro, Monique says you're dumb, but if he crashes, I'll have to live with his family.
Puzzle time.
And if he dies, Ghost George will haunt me forever.
Grab a chip. Want a chip?
You know I can't grab your ghost chips.
Go away.
Spoon.
Spacehead. Bro. Willie, what are you doing, bro?
Oh, I've been internalizing a really complicated situation in my head.
What are you on about?
I don't think you should drive.
Nah.
No, you're too drunk, bro. You just crash here.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay.
Stop a mate from driving drunk. Legend.
So that commercial is basically saying, be a hero in your social group by standing up and encouraging a friend to be safer. And the whole commercial was showing all the things in this boy's head, all the social rejection he thought he might get by asking his friend not to drive drunk, when in fact, his friend was very receptive to the suggestion and agreed, thereby showing young boys in that culture, it's okay to ask your friend not to drive drunk. The last one I want to talk about is values, understanding the values in your communities and leveraging those values, especially the positive values that really are consistent and support traffic safety. This is one for seatbelts, and you'll see it plays very strongly on the universal value of protecting family and showing how wearing a seatbelt supports and acknowledges that important social value of safety. So you see how that commercial shows why wearing a seatbelt is so important to people's values, which should encourage people engaging in wearing seatbelts. I just have a minute left, so I want to just touch on one more part, which is how we can use traffic safety culture as a concept to change the actions our traffic safety stakeholders are willing to take. In the US, as in other countries, we're beginning to adopt the safe system approach, recognizing that all the parts of the system need to work together for us to get to zero traffic fatalities, the user, the road, the vehicle, enforcement, EMS. And that system, that way of approaching traffic safety, has a number of principles that support it, that are necessary to be successful with it. One is believing that there's no acceptable death, no death or serious injury is acceptable. Recognizing that humans make mistakes, how do we design a system that accommodates those mistakes? Humans are vulnerable to high impact forces, how do we reduce those forces? So there's a number of principles that underlie that way of doing traffic safety in the safe system approach. We developed this model which helps traffic safety stakeholder agencies measure and identify how ready they are to change how they operate to this new safe system approach. And a key part of this model is to measure the stakeholder agency's organizational culture to see how well it aligns with those principles and values of the safe system approach. The logic being, no traffic safety organization can effectively sustain the use of the safe system approach unless their culture aligns with the principles and values, the culture, of the safe system approach. So we work on ways to help organizations shift their culture so they're more aligned with and more able to effectively and sustainably use the safe system approach to reach their traffic safety goal of 0 fatalities. Thank you for your time. I look forward to talking to you later.
Thank you, Professor Ward. The next lecturer is Ms. Lotte Brandon, Executive Director, Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety. Ms. Brandon, please proceed.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me here to Japan, to this important conference. I've been looking very much forward to it, and it's very good to see all of you here in the room and also all of you back home. I just browsed through the list and I can see some of the Alliance members are there, so welcome to you. My name is Lotte Brøndum, Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety. I'm heading, and I've been doing that since its inception. We are a civil society organization that consists of 360 organizations, NGOs, scattered around the world in 102 countries. And all these organizations are tirelessly working every day to prevent that more people are dying on our roads. And I'll just give you an example of one of the members that I met a few years ago here in this region. It was a gentleman, and I met him in a cafe where when I arrived, he had a napkin in front of him where he had jotted down some numbers, said 48, 32, and then his phone rang, and he picked it up and he jotted down 52 on the napkin. And I asked him, so what are all these numbers? And he explained to me that every day he receives calls from the ambulance services and from the fire department services around the country where he's living. And all those numbers are people who have died in a crash. And all these numbers he reports in a radio program. And he does that because he's very angry about the numbers of fatalities, and he's very upset about it, and he wants to make sure that this is not happening to all. So by reporting it and by, you really try to enforce that this is something that's happening every single day. That's his mission. This is an example of tirelessly working, but it's also an example of using evidence, and it's an example of using friends and partnerships. He's using media, he's using the partnerships that he has, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So this is Montevideo, and Montevideo is a city in Uruguay. It's the capital of Uruguay, and as any other city around the world, in Uruguay, people are moving to the cities, and cities is really becoming the future of where people are moving. We know today, as in 2023, that 50% of all the population live in cities, and by 2050, 2/3 of the world's population is going to be in cities. But what we also know is that cities are not prepared for this urbanization, are not prepared infrastructure-wise for this urbanization. There's no walking, there's no cycling, and there's no public transport in it to keep people safe. Right now, 2023, only half of the people who live in these cities have access to public transport. So if we want cities to be safe for the people who are living it, who are moving there, and the 2/3 of the 8 billion people who are moving to cities, who we are here in the world, who are going to move in cities, we need to make sure that this plan is sustainable, and that we are transforming the urban spaces that we have, and they're built and managed to be safe. And for that, we need evidence and we need collaboration. So these are the 2 points I want to make, and I'll start with the first one: use evidence. I'm part of the Alliance, the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety, a network organization for NGOs. And a couple of years ago, we decided that everything we do has to be evidence-based. What we also found is that there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of wisdom, and there's a lot of people who have done this work for us. So we know what's safe. We actually know everything. We know that 30 kilometers an hour is a safe speed limit in urban settings. We know that zones where 30 kilometers an hour is safe for where people and vehicles mix. We know that speed reduction makes cities safer. We need pedestrian facilities will make cities safer. And we know that light infrastructure such as speed bumps are an important part of keeping people safe. But we're not using it. And actually, this is what we wanted to test as an alliance to make sure that is this in place? Are all the efforts that are made, that can be made to keep people safe, those who are moving to cities, is that made? The other point I want to make is around friends and collaboration. I'll get to that later. So in order to make sure that we were looking at whether these urban settings are prepared for a safer environment, we have invented something we called a mobility snapshot. And it is really what it's called. It's a snapshot, it's a picture of an intersection. And you see here on the picture here that we have around 12 pictures from around the world of what mobility looks like in infrastructure, in crossings. And what we did as a team, and this is what NGOs are going to do moving forward, is that we take the temperature of the space that is available, and each of us went to a setting. And before we did that, we sort of looked at why we are doing that, because what we know is that if a space is safe for pedestrians, it's safe for everyone. We also know that to improve pedestrian safety, we need to make sure we know and learn about the experience that pedestrians have. We know that we need to use data for this. We also know that intersections are particularly dangerous for pedestrians, and that most pedestrian crashes occur when pedestrians are crossing the road. And we also know that road design does not consider pedestrian safety, doesn't take into account the convenience and the behavioral patterns. And this is what we did as we went to the streets. So went to an intersection, and then we looked whether there is 30-kilometer zone, whether there's lower speeds, whether there are pedestrian facilities, and whether there are traffic calming measures. So this little test is something that I invite all of you to do, and you're very welcome to find an intersection in your city, maybe here in Tokyo, where you want to do the same, really taking the temperature of how we use the space and do an analysis of the intersection and really dig down into who is your city built for? Is it built for cars or is it built for people? So this is what we found. We went to 12 cities in 11 high, lower and middle income countries. And you can see here that there was a wide range of number of people who are crossing the street within a peak hour. At two of the intersections, and one of them is Copenhagen, I tell you, 2,500 pedestrians used this intersection during peak hour. It's a lot of pedestrians. We can also see that basic pedestrian safety features were lacking across all the 12 places we went. And I think really this is talking to the fact that even though we live in high, low, middle income country, it's the same features we see everywhere. People are not looked after, the pedestrians are not a priority. We could also see that it's relatively low cost that it takes to actually change this. To, for example, install a pedestrian crossing is not an expensive feature, and to install a traffic calming measure, it's not a very expensive piece. Let me just take you to one example of a city, and this is Abuja. Abuja is a city in Nigeria. It's the capital city of Nigeria. In Nigeria, there's 1.1 million annual casualties. This cost $21.5 million US, and pedestrians account for 37% of these road deaths in this city. To itself, what some of the findings we got, and again we're looking at what the speed limit is, what the pedestrian facilities crossing look like, and whether they're traffic calming. All measures that we know will keep people safe. At this particular crossing, that's actually the crossing you have here on the picture, 4,410 pedestrians were using this intersection during peak hours. There is a 50 kilometer an hour speed limit. There are footpaths on both sides, but there's no way the pedestrians can cross this. There's no traffic calming. And if you measure it into IRAP star rating, it's a 1-star road. We also looked at what can you actually do about this. And if you look, it's very simple and very straightforward measurements that you can do and not very expensive. You could reduce the speed and the operating speed to 30 kilometers an hour. You know that people are not killed if they're hit by a car, but they are driving 30 kilometers an hour. You could also install pedestrian crossing on the main road and on the side road, for example, with a signal. That would not be a very expensive measurement to do. And you could also put in a traffic calming, for example, a speed bump. All measures that are quite inexpensive and would actually prioritize those who are walking who are walking in the cities. And why do we do this? We do this because, and we do this with all our NGOs around the world in the 102 countries, 360 of them. We really want to have an aspiration and make people have a critical look at what city they would like to live in. We want to raise the importance of what you can do about it and make sure that this evidence is brought forward and there's an aspiration of what city you would like to live in. It's really tragic that children who are going to school in the morning and in the afternoon, going back in the afternoon, the most dangerous time of the day for a child is when they go to school because of the roads. Is this the city we want? Is this your vision for what you would like to the city? I think it's the better conditions that you create for your community, it's more livable, and the greater effect it will have on quality of life. So this is more like what we would like it to look. And if we think back of Abuja, it's really a modernized city that is built for cars. It prioritizes cars. It doesn't prioritize those who are walking. It prioritizes those who need to go from A to B, and also those who can afford a car. We know, for example, that a lot of poor people would not ever have an opportunity to own a car, but if that's the only way you can get around, it prioritizes those who can afford a car. We also know that car ownership in many countries are very low for women, so it also prioritizes it prioritizes men who are driving. And we have to remember that safety culture, it is shaped from the top because it is about prioritization. It is about how we build our road. If we build it for cars, there will be cars. If we build it for pedestrians and those who are walking or cycling, it will prioritize those and it will be for those. So if we want to promote safety and a safer culture, we need to make sure that there are opportunities to both walk and cycle. And if we look into the wider SDGs and the wider agendas that are rocking right now, for example, around emission, gender and climate action, all those have an interest in building cities that are for pedestrians. And that brings me to the second point I had around building friends and friendships and partnerships, because we do have a lot of connections out there. We do have a lot of partners who actually have the same agenda as us. 30 kilometers an hour, speed reduction, traffic calming, and pedestrian facilities are all areas that create this culture that values people, it values health, it values equity. And I think we in our road safety community too long have felt that we were actually acting alone. We were acting in our own little bubble. And our case, we're maybe not strong enough. We were up against all these other agendas, the climate agenda and the gender agenda, and we were not able to raise our voice and be as loud as the rest of them. I think we were also very happy when we got 3.6, the 50% reduction on the agenda, but we have seen it to an extent as a single standing target, which was not something that was relevant to others. And I think that's where we need to see that our agenda is actually one that is intertwined with all the rest of the agendas. We're part of a bigger picture. We're part of a big SDG family, and we're part of a family that leaves no one behind. So all these other agendas are also having an interest in us being active and promoting what we want to do. And there's a lot of ways that we can collaborate. I'll give you an example here. This is Kelvin, and Kelvin lives in South Africa. He lives in close to Cape Town, and he's disabled. As you see, he uses a wheelchair every day to go to work, where he's a guard down on the beach, where he's guarding cars and looking after cars. Kelvin needs, he's driving on this road because there's no pedestrian facilities. He has to drive on the road. And if you look up here, I don't know if you can see it, but you see it says 60 kilometers an hour. So actually Kelvin has to be on a road where cars are driving 60 kilometers an hour. That's not safe. If SDG number 1 is talking about ending poverty, and if we want to enable safe work opportunities, we need to make sure that there's safe access for Kelvin and for many others. We did a study in 2020 that we issued, where we asked 6,000 people about their experiences with crashes, and 11% of them reported that they had lost income because of a crash. It could either that they had lost their job, but it could also be the cost that had been involved in treating their injuries, their car that had to be repaired, loss of hours that had been work hours that had been lost. So crashes have spiral people into poverty. So SDG 1 and those who are working on poverty evaluation is a friend of ours, and they have the same interest as us. If we're moving on, decent work and economic growth, there was a World Bank study from, I think, 2020 that looked at if we met the 2030 targets and reduced fatalities by 50%, there was an additional flow of income of 22% GDP per capita that would flow into some countries. That's an enormous amount of money, and that's an enormous lack of interest in our community and our work if we're not taking advantage of that. We know that gender is, we just talked about women being more likely to walk and being dependent on walking and public transport, but that public transport and those ways of walking has to be safe, because women are experience a higher risk of harassment on the roads. We also know SDG number 3, health, around well-being, about physical well-being and psychological well-being. There's an enormous, tremendous well-being in walking and cycling and being active. Obesity, cardiovascular diseases, a lot of this can be prevented if we create cities and sustainable environments where we can that create a walking and a safer culture for people. Quality education, SDG number 4. Again, in our study, we found that 15.5% of the respondents in our survey, children had to drop out of school because of a crash, as a result of a crash. We talked about the sustainable cities, that property value, for example, a thing we're not talking about a lot, really those where you can walk and get access to property value in the increase. And we know, for example, that there was an increase in Montreal of 40% of sale in areas where they provided pedestrian facilities. And then there's SDG 13 on climate. We will not meet the Paris Agreement unless we are providing more opportunities for walking and cycling. Transport is one of the biggest one of the biggest culprits in emission. Therefore, walking and cycling and public transport are really ways to promote a more safe and accessible and green environment. I want to thank you very much for inviting me here. I try to give you some few ideas about how simple improvements based on evidence and based on how we can promote and change and transform our urban settings. Also that the culture of car is the one that is dominating, and that's something we can change. And I gave you some examples of how we at the Alliance is trying to make that shift in mindset and change by doing some simple interventions. We have friends in the SDGs. I want to remind you of that. So we're not just us alone against the world. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you, Ms. Brandon. Now the panel discussion shall commence. First, let us introduce today's panelists. Professor Nicholas Ward, Ms. Lotte Brandon, Professor Yuto Kitamura, Ms. Linda Wells. And the coordinator of the session is Professor Shunsuke Managi, Professor, Department of Urban and Environmental Engineering, School of Engineering, Kyushu University. Now I would like to pass the facilitation to Professor Managi. Professor Managi, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have the panel discussion today. As initially Professor Nakamura has indicated, today's workshop is about traffic culture for sustainable societies. So we're going to discuss about what the transportation and especially the safety can contribute to the sustainable societies, especially to the regions. So this is something about how the usual non-economic factor contribute to the some goodness to the society in the regions. So already the two keynote speakers today indicated the two aspects. One is how the driver should be doing it. Not drinking, thinking more carefully, and also the other aspect will be more from the space issues. How the road should be constructed with pedestrian or traffic coming. So there are many issues on evidence-based policy makings. So there are many suggestions can be provided. We see many different stories from the different countries. So a lot of issues on the academics, industries, and energy are ongoing. So in this panel discussion, we have 70 minutes. And then following those 70 minutes panel discussion, we're going to have 20 minutes question and answer from you and a group from here. So as a moderator explained to you, if you put a comment online, I can see those questions, actually one computer in English, and if you put a question in Japanese, I can see my right-hand side. So please do either way. And if not so many questions there, and also we accept a question from this audience. So happy to take as many questions as possible. And then before that, please put a comment anytime you wish. And before that, we're going to have each speaker's talk. And I asked them before this workshop that our topic in this panel discussion will be more on the key performance indicator to judge how the traffic safety relate to the sustainable cities. We talk about this KPI, this key performance indicator, because as two keynote speakers already talk about it, we need to have decision making to the public. We need to have the good decision making and the action to the private based on the evidence. So now evidence-based policy making is so clearly widespread. So we got to have some number, some evidence. But maybe some of them are not so clear to see what is evidence. So I asked them, what should be the KPI for this traffic safety for the sustainable cities? So each panelist is going to talk about what will be the KPI that he or she is thinking about it. So we have the speaker from this side, then to the later side over there. So first, Linza, can you start? I think each of you gonna come up here and talk, please. Thank you.
Minasan, konnichiwa. Watashi wa Linza desu. Dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
My name is Linza. Hello, thank you very much.
Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences, IATSS, for inviting me to participate in this year's GIFT Symposium. I am delighted to be here. A little bit about myself, very quickly. I'm currently Executive Director of MDS Traffic Planners and MDS Consultancy Group based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which specializes in providing planning and consultancy on all modes of transport, from traffic planning to ports and shipping, railway, and aviation across Asia, primarily in Southeast Asia. I am also proud to be an alumni of IATSS Forum, which I attended in 2004 in Suzuka, staying there for almost 2 months, a place that I discovered green tea, which I now cannot live without. Very quickly, the topic given was traffic culture for a sustainable society, and the main indicators for sustainable transportation from cultural perspective, but not currently listed as a KPI in practice. Of course, pedestrian safety, public transport usage, shared mobility, and evolving transport modes are some of the major indicators. If we look at, I think one of my slides has disappeared. Yes, it has. Okay, jumping into the current scenario, ownership of cars, particularly in Southeast Asia, is seen as a status symbol. This car culture, so to speak, influences acceptance and use of shared active transport modes. So, for instance, in some cultures, biking and walking is seen as an indicator of low income. And this is something that needs to change, and we need to create more opportunities for this through the introduction of bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, as well as improving the first and last mile connectivity. The influence of temperature, or rather climate influence, influences pedestrian behavior and allows people to choose active transport over other modes such as the car. Urban planning must support this in order to reduce our environmental impact and create more livable communities. In this example, we can see this is a picture of central London in 2019, and in 2023 in the same space. We can see that by changing the urban environment, we have been able to create a space for active transport users and a more livable community. Very quickly, the 5 elements in road safety: education, policy, engineering and planning, enforcement, and evolving issues. Now, if we go deeper into that, the education, I feel that school curriculum currently should take children through to the planning process to develop the right safety culture. And in terms of policies, governments and regulators need to follow international standards to create the right habits and behavior among users. Engineering and planning, regulations that govern urban planning and design for any development must have safety rules and the green agenda in place. And evolving issues such as those relating to electric vehicles, hydrogen-powered vehicles, personal mobility vehicles, and so on, are some things that governments and planners need to consider for the future. If we look at road safety education, We know that, for instance, children are the most vulnerable group when it comes to road accidents. If we look at this headline here, which is taken from a Malaysian newspaper dated September 2023, 1 child a day dies from road accidents in Malaysia, for instance. The picture below it shows a man taking what looks to be half the class to school on his motorbike, is an indication of the lack of resources as well as lack of sustainability modes of transport, such as school bus subsidies, which we are actively trying to promote currently. The picture on the right is taken from Mr. Farin, a Malaysian alumni, where Malaysia IATSS Forum alumni led an initiative in school through the practical delivery of a traffic safety culture program. So the idea was to instill road safety culture from a young age in school. So this is currently being done in a few schools in Kuala Lumpur, and we welcome support from IATSS Japan. Policy. Just a little bit quickly about policy, how it can influence road safety. In the picture on the left, we see motorcyclists on the highway. Now, this is an example taken from Malaysia, which shows that due to the current policy, which still allows for motorbikes to be on the highway instead of using a dedicated motorcycle lane. Enforcement. Various issues in enforcement, but what I would like to zoom in on is overloading lorries. Overloading on lorries has been a recent issue, and it would appear that we need to have stricter enforcement, but aside from that, there needs to be a concerted effort by Southeast Asian countries to invest more in rail in order to take cargo off the road and onto the rail, so that we can create safer roads. And engineering and planning, of course, I think you can see from the pictures, faded road markings, potholes, create a situation which endangers not only pedestrian but motorized users as well. The example on the left shows a new junction design that has been designed by my colleague at MDS. It's called the XT junction, with the aim of reducing conflict points and providing better access for pedestrians. So this is something absolutely brand new. We are hoping to trial it on a particular junction in Malaysia soon. And finally, I think we also need to consider evolving traffic and road safety issues. For the future, there will be a change in the types of vehicles that we will see on the road. So we will see more autonomous vehicles, and we will see, obviously, beginning to see a lot more electric vehicles on the road, which have its own challenges in terms of the lack of sound, so to speak, which is a particular challenge for people with disabilities, such as the visually impaired and the hearing impaired. So, of course, we also have this new phenomenon of the distracted pedestrian, those using mobile phones while crossing the roads and using headphones and so on. So I think the takeoff from this is that I think governments, regulators, policymakers and planners need to consider the changing environment, need to consider the changing modes of transport and plan for the future. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Next will be Yuto.
Good afternoon. My name is Yuto Kitamura. I'm a professor at the University of Tokyo and also a member of the IATSS. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and experiences. Last 10 years or so, I have been involved in several IATSS research projects. And let me share some of my experiences in the IATSS projects. For instance, we had a research project led by President Takeuchi at that time. At that time, he was not president yet, but he was leading the research project in India. And then we had opportunities to visit India several times. And then just Linza showed a photo of having 5-6 persons on the motorcycle. We really saw that kind of, scenes so many times in India. And we had opportunity to work with police department, and we checked the record of accidents. What we identified, when the motorcycle accommodating more than 3 passengers, there were very few accidents, in fact. You know why? Because they drove slow, and often the case, they are families, so they drove very carefully. So in fact, the motorcycles, which has the accidents, there are certain conditions. If the drivers get drunk, having a friend behind, driving very fast in nighttime, that's the most risky driving behavior. When we identified this, of course, we didn't say we should increase the number of passengers, obviously. But at the same time, we have to pay attention how people are conscious about safety or safetiness while they are driving. And then the conditions sets that consciousness. There's another research project in Cambodia. I have been leading a few research projects in Cambodia. For instance, the photo on the left-hand side, we put the camera on the driver of the motorcycles and then try to see how they have been driving. In fact, this research project, we have been collaborating with JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. Recently, IATSS and JICA have been collaborating more and more. And then some of our projects are really the products of the collaborations. And in one of the projects in Cambodia, JICA installed new traffic lights in Phnom Penh city. They installed more than 100 new traffic lights because they used to have, in Phnom Penh, there were, if I remember correctly, there were 7 different types of traffic lights. The vertical ones, horizontal ones, and then having the counter or not, because each donor occasionally installed the traffic lights, and then there was no connections among the traffic lights. So JICA tried to, reinstall all the traffic lights in the city of Phnom Penh. And then also they made, traffic lights much more visible, okay? Because the maintenance was not done properly in the past. So now that traffic lights in Phnom Penh city, drivers can more easily recognize the traffic lights. Then we check the several crossings which have more accidents, and then also the violation of the law. So we check before the installation of the new traffic lights and after. Okay, and then we compare how drivers actually change their behavior in such crossings. And then we have identified more drivers violate the law, which means they ignore the traffic lights. Can you guess why? Because you could see the traffic lights of not your direction, but also the other direction clearly. So they can see when your lights will change. So, they can just guess, oh, now my light should be blue. So, green, sorry. Then they just start without waiting enough. This is again, the engineering can do the, can change the new system. Into engineering side, we can introduce new system and having better equipment and facilities. If people doesn't follow the rule, if people are not careful enough, what happens? They just break the law. There's another project, the photo on the right-hand side. This is an ongoing research project. I work with the high school. This high school is located in Nose region in Osaka Prefecture. This is a very mountainous areas. And then the population has been, in this region, population has been shrinking. So the bus company decided to reduce the number of buses to operate. So now the high school kids are struggling to commute to their schools because they don't have enough number of buses to take. So as a IATSS project, we decided to donate the electronic bike because this is a mountainous area. So we donated 20 electronic bike for the kids to drive by themselves. Okay. So by doing so, what happened? The students recognized the real situations of the road because they drive the bike every day now. So they recognize that certain parts of the town, they had problems, for instance, pothole, there's a hole on the street, or there's, trees covering the curb mirror, and then they couldn't recognize the car is coming from around the corner. So these high school students discussed and identified where the problems are happening in the area. Then they came up with the recommendations to the city government to respond to these problems. We are not just trying to teach our high school students how to drive safely. In fact, the students themselves identify these problems, and then they become, aware of the problems. Linda emphasized the importance of road safety education. In fact, my following slides are also talking about traffic safety education because I'm an education expert, and I very much share the issues raised by her. So that's why instead of going through this slide, I wanted to share my experience with our research projects, because these examples shows what is important in education. It's not just teaching rules or law, but encouraging the learners to think by themselves. And they can be more independent and autonomous to identify the problems they are facing. That can be the first step to change the situations to make our cities and then towns more sustainable. But I would like to draw your attention on one issue. There are certain group of people whom we consider vulnerable, like children, older people, people with disabilities. We have to pay more attention to this vulnerable group of people. Otherwise, we cannot really realize the sustainable cities. So last point I would like to share with you are the key performance indicators for traffic safety education. These are somewhat more relating to education in order to make our cities more sustainable. At the same time, I'd like to emphasize there is a very difficult challenge for us to come up with this kind of indicator for thinking of culture. Culture is not something you can measure easily. I don't say impossible. It's very difficult to measure. I think that's why we don't have the goal of culture in SDGs. In fact, there are three parts in all the SDGs goals and indicators. You can find the word culture, but there is no measurable indicators relating to culture presented in the SDGs, because culture is not something you can easily measure. So that, I think, is something I'm challenging to Professor Managi, whether we can really come up with all the set of the indicators to really think of the promotion of traffic culture in order to realize sustainable society. So I very much look forward to discussing about this as well in our later discussion. But I'd like to finish my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next will be the Rote, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we got I think you know that we got an assignment here. We were handed over a report, which is a UN report that has a long list of KPIs for smart, sustainable cities. And it's very comprehensive. I think it's hundreds of pages. And then we were tasked with coming up with KPIs that were not in the report. So you can see it's really a challenge. But thank you for challenging us, because I spent a lot of time on this, figuring out what can I bring to the table, and I'm really delighted to hear my colleagues' views here, and thanks for sharing that. So this is very much in the vein of what I've just been talking about, who we build our cities for. Are we building it for cars? Are we building it for people? I live in Copenhagen. This is a city of 1.1 million people. Tokyo, I think you have 14 million people. And as I just talked about, people will move to urban settings. We're 8 billion people right now, and 55% of us live in urban cities. So these cities need to be safe, they need to be accessible, they need to be green, and they need to be livable. So who are we building these cities for? If I go back to this report, this benchmarking report, they use different indicators to tell us about what are KPIs for a sustainable cities. And one I picked is on page 59, for those of you who want to check. This talks about car-free zones and pedestrian zones. And I picked that because that's one that really talks about how a safe, green, livable, and accessible city look like. It's a great indicator, and I can tell you that here in Tokyo, from a report from 2018, road space in your city is composed of 18.8 roadway and 3% walkway. I don't know the number for other cities, but that's the KPI, and you're apparently measuring it, so congratulations on that. But embedded in all this is really that if you want to live livable cities, embedded in this KPI is a value to having car-free zones and having pedestrian zones. And these are really great indicators for walking, and is really where you can make sure that walking is possible. It's creating an active a mobility culture where walking is valued as a health indicator. as an indicator for gender equality, as an indicator for climate commitment, etc. So not surprised, you will see here that if I would add anything, it's in vein of my presentation right now, I would add a KPI which was creating a culture and an environment where walking is safe. So my KPIs, my suggestions to KPIs would be around the percentage of 30-kilometer zones, for example, around churches, around schools, around marketplaces, around places where a lot of people and cars are mixing. It would also be around speed reduction. What is the speed level? This is already measured in the Global Status Report that the WHO is issuing the new version of in 2 weeks' time, 13th of December. I would also mention the percentage of pedestrian facilities where we actually enabling people to walk safely, walkways, for example, but also crossings, and then traffic calming measures. So those would be my suggestions to KPIs, and thank you very much for this. I think I'm done, yeah.
Next will be Nicholas.
Hello again. I took the homework assignment and slightly modified it. I'm going to be talking about KPI, not in terms of key performance indicators, but instead key process indicators. And what I'm trying to do is think about not measures of outcomes for traffic safety and sustainability, but what conditions do we need to establish so we're successful in reaching and sustaining our traffic safety goals. And there's three, I think, that are important, three conditions we need to grow and create in society to make sure we're successful in reaching our target of 0 traffic fatalities and sustaining that goal. The first, I am referring to social capital, which some of you may have heard of. Social capital is basically the resource, the capabilities we have as a society by working together for each other. Social capital is often measured and defined in terms of how much trust we have in each other in society and a sense of obligation to reciprocally help each other as a community. And we know from the literature that communities with high social capital tend to have better public health outcomes, lower traffic fatalities, for example. So if we're trying to achieve a sustainable future, we need to feel that we're connected to each other and want to work together to reach and sustain that future, which needs strong social capital. It's difficult to measure, as are all the concepts I'm suggesting, but there are accepted questions, questionnaires, surveys that you can use to sample your population to get data from survey data, which measures their current level of social capital. One of the most basic questions is simply asking people how much they agree or disagree with this statement, "I trust most people I know." A very simple metric for social capital. There are more complicated ones you can use, but they all rely on developing questions that you survey your population and track that as a key PI, key process indicator. I'm arguing you need to have strong social capital as part of your process of achieving your traffic safety and sustainability goals. Having just spoken to you about traffic safety culture, it's no surprise, I think traffic safety culture should also be a KPI. you will not reach your traffic safety goals and sustain those goals unless your communities share a strong culture that prioritizes traffic safety and believes it's possible to reach zero and has a sense of social responsibility for being safer so that the groups people belong to are safer. We heard that it is in fact difficult to measure culture, but there are also standard questionnaires, way of asking questions in surveys or interviews amongst community populations to collect that data. It is time consuming. It requires some rigorous design of the questions and analyzing the data, but you can come up with a metric of the reported culture in your communities if you take the time to develop those questions appropriately. When I was doing project with Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, they decided to build a survey questionnaire that they sent out to a sample of residents in Minnesota to come up with that metric for what is the traffic safety culture for Minnesota residents at a snapshot in time. And now they're thinking about doing it annually to see how culture changes over time in relation to how traffic fatalities and deaths change over time. So a difficult process, but you can measure culture if you have the time and resources to do so. And the last one I want to talk about is time orientation. It's an individual trait. Some people discuss it as being part of our culture. Whether I as an individual or me as my culture tends to focus on the past, whether I focus on the immediate present, or whether I think about the future. If we're trying to develop a sustainable society, that requires us making decisions now that affect the future. So we need to develop a shared mindset where we're making decisions about not what benefits me right now, but what decisions are we making now that ensure we have that sustainable future we want. Sustainability requires thinking into the future and making decisions now that benefit the future. So how do we measure time orientation as a psychological construct? There are questionnaires, surveys that also measure this concept. And that could be tracked too, and strategies developed to help people start thinking about not what do they want, not decisions that benefit them right now, but what's the right choice, what's the right decision to benefit everybody in the future? Because that's where sustainability exists, in the future, not right now. So those are three psychological concepts that I want to put on the table. I'm a psychologist, so of course that's what you're going to hear me say. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you all. As I said in this panel discussion, I want to talk about the KPIs. We know from the many different industry, like the SDGs or any global indicator or any global database. I checked the database on the global base once. We find more than 3,200 indicators is open-based data available now, like the child labor, human capital, and also the nature's values, also the local economic values. So there are so many indicators available. And once we stick to the issue for infrastructures, again, there are many KPIs and clearly more than 50 indicators. So then the issue comes to the topic for sustainable city from the traffic safeties. Maybe we can narrow down to the main sources that people can have more attention. So I go from the top to the bottoms. First, Linza talked about equal access and also the enforcement. So it's a more issue for how the society is preparing the value to the society, value to the peoples. Then even the people who do not have a strong access to the transportation, so moving around, they prepare well to reduce accident. And then you talk about the attention should be more important for the vulnerable peoples, and giving the limit that maybe we are not able to measure, such as cultures. So easy one is like the number of accidents, how much speed it is, how many people die, and how many people are crossing the road. But those cultural value is clearly important factors. So even though probably hard to measure, or maybe no perfect proxy to do it, but still attention should be given to that factors. And then Lotte talk about the attention is more side to the, again, sort of vulnerable peoples. So the question will be more for who is my city designed for? So the people who is walking around using the bike, and the handicapped peoples, those will be facing to the some difficulties, and particular lower speed or pedestrian facilities. So those detailed value can take account to judge how the sustainable city will be look like. And then finally, Nicolas talked about the social capitals. So social capital has many different measurements and many discussions. Some of the non-economists, psychologists, they say we do not and we should not measure the integrated social capitals, because it's basically everything. So it's like the measuring the value for the whole earth. So it's becoming everything. But even those people admit we can measure component of the social capitals. So Nicolas talked about some specific factor that probably easy to measure and some proxy to do it. And then also talk about the time orientation. So not just thinking about the next 2 years, but for the what about for the 40 years, 50 years later, how that region to be sustainable or not. So by summary, we know that some of them will be possible to measure and already available. But some other, we do not have it. So we can use survey technique to provide proxy to satisfy some of the consequences that city is progressing for or not. So I think there are equal understanding that it is difficult to measure some of them, but possible to measure it. Then if this IATSS or some sort of that transportation related organization provide, this will be the one that industry and the public can go for it. There will be the agreement toward it. And this is, I think, important step, because like the SDGs and many other reports, people start to suggest we should use it, and then the number is ready, people start to use it. So SDGs, in one way, it's very simple. We just need to make a number for 260s. So that's kind of easy. So same for the transportations. So they're the issue that we can measure it. So I want to first ask to each panelist member that listening to the other people's talk, you have maybe some agreement or disagreement that others said is hopefully wrong, or you come up with better other indicator that you can suggest. So again, I go from the Linda to the Nicolas in this side. And again, waiting this side, I'm waiting that you're gonna ask question in the Zoom link so that I can check in the later time. Can we go from here to them?
Thank you very much, Managi-san. To answer your question as to what I agree or disagree with what has been said by the other panelists, I am very much taken by what was said by Kitamura-san about allowing the user to show what the issues are. For example, on the journey to school, the user will know best. So in this case, I think he mentioned the school children being the ones who will know the issues that they face on a daily basis. So I think that's a very good idea, and I think it's something that I would like to see how we can implement as well. I also agree with Lotte and how she has worked hard to try and promote sustainable goals by promoting active transport in terms of walking, cycling, and so on. I think it's an admirable goal and something that we should be working towards. Obviously, however, there are certain conditions in different countries which do not currently allow for this. In other words, situations, particularly in my experience in Southeast Asia, talking about Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on, whereby although the desire to create these sustainability modes of transport are there, however, climate being one of the conditions may not be as kind as in Japan or elsewhere. 35 degrees Celsius to perhaps use a bicycle to cycle for 10 kilometers might be a bit difficult for some. And of course, in some cases, we have situations where there are no pavements for pedestrians to walk on. So there's a lot of change that needs to be done before we can even talk about trying to achieve certain percentage goals and so on. So we kind of have to start from the bottom, whereas certain other countries are already way up there. But of course, it's a goal that we all need to try and achieve.
Thank you very much. I really agree with you, Linda. I mean, particularly the last point you mentioned, you know, there has to be the common set of indicators shared by all the countries, but while certain indicators must be designed for certain conditions the country have been facing. I mean, I've been doing my research in the context of developing countries. So looking at the low-income countries or even some of the middle-income countries, there's a lack of public transportation system, and then also, you know, I like the picture Linda showed, the ownership of car as a status symbol, which is very much linked to Lotte's point, who is my city designed for? I mean, basically in these low-income countries today, there has been, you know, economic growth ongoing, and then very rapid motorization has been happening in these societies. So they don't have enough time to develop the public transportation system. So they just have to try to catch up the economic growth, economic development that the industrialized country have already achieved. So what is important is the time orientation. I think Nicholas has pointed out. Certain countries do not have enough time to really, you know, do everything other countries have done in the past. So, of course, you know, technologically we can jump, but at the same time, that kind of jump may lose enough time to cultivate a sense of, you know, to cultivate a traffic culture, you know, to share the share the values, and then also share the belief system, which Nicholas also pointed out as a traffic safety culture, as a process indicator. So when we discuss about these indicators, I think we really have to see this kind of the time allocated, you know, different time allocated for the different countries. And even thinking of Japan, you know, we rapidly, I mean, developed our society throughout the 60s and 70s. And then the cars are always the, you know, kind of the main vehicles. I mean, main actors or stakeholders on the street and roads and the streets. We didn't pay enough attention on the those bicycle drivers and then pedestrians. So we also have, this is not only the issue of the low and the middle income countries, but the country like Japan also have to think of. So this is my first comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing your amazing insights. I think it was quite interesting for me to hear the word values being mentioned here, because I think all cultures are based on values, and these values are to a certain extent embedded in everything we do. And I don't think there are evil countries that have evil thoughts, or there's values that are not based on something truly humane and a way that we all want to prosperity and growth and do the best for everything. So for everybody and for all the people in our communities. But when we then look out of the window and look to our streets and look to the way that we have built our societies, there have been given values to certain areas over other areas. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting, and also a very good exercise to maybe look inward and say, well, are we living the values that we are really aspiring to? And I just want to give you an example. I was in Rwanda a couple of weeks ago for a walking conference, and Rwanda is in Africa. It's a tiny little country. What's very significant about Rwanda is that they had a civil war 29 years ago, where 1 million people were killed in 100 days. It was a civil war. It was two groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, who fought each other. And that happened because there had been sort of a priority given to one group over another. So one had been given more values, more priorities, and actually had gotten to an extent where the other group was sort of insignificant. And this was over a few years, over a couple of decades that had happened. But the result was a civil war where 1 million people were killed in 100 days. This country is now rebuilding itself, and it was very, very impressive to see how walking had been part of the values that they wanted to instill as part of that rehabilitation, that part of coming back as a unified country. And they did that because walking is really where everyone are at the same level. We can all walk. We all walk at some point of our day, whether it's down to the bus or down to our car. Or we are all walkers. And if you provide an environment where we can all walk, you're also providing an environment and a culture and a country where everyone's equal. And that was a very big part of Rwanda's strategy to coming back and rehabilitation of their country. But a value is also health, just leaving Rwanda for now. It's health. It's that we are healthy people. You talked about notching. You talked about how we all inspiring each other and sort of pushing each other in certain directions. It's also a value to be a healthy community. And I was very inspired sort of about availability. We have all seen the 15-minute cities being built, which is built on density. It's actually taking that community, that sort of urbanization, the flip side of urbanization is the density, but taking that to a positive and shifting that to a positive means that if we all have 15 minutes to the daily course that we do, to school, to work, at some point of time, it will be really a much more healthy community. So values around communities, around health, are really fundamental to all of us. So I think there is a hope here for a better society and a better communities where these values are put forward. I will stop here.
It just reminded me I think one of the keys to sustainability is, you mentioned a couple times, is seeing how traffic safety connects to the other efforts and values going on. So it's not traffic safety in its own silo, it's traffic safety as part of the other values and important parts of social fabric that need to all work together. So thinking at that system level, rather than looking at traffic safety in our own little silo, how we connect to the other people, doing other topics like public health and so forth, and well-being. While we're all talking about KPI, it's sort of in my head trying to help identify how these different KPI work together. I find it useful in my head to think of KPIs at 3 different levels. One is it's sort of measuring success with the goal. So if we're trying to reach 0 fatalities as our safety goal, as we heard, it's fairly easy to measure the number of fatalities. We have a simple metric for that. Another level of KPI is sort of success in our objectives of the things we're trying to do. So measuring how much police enforcement, measuring changes in speeds on our roadways, because those are presumed to be mechanisms by which we can achieve our goal of 0 fatalities. And then the last level, which is perhaps where I was focusing on, is what conditions need to exist in order for those mechanisms, those strategies to be effective in order to get to the goal of 0 fatalities. So for example, efforts to implement changes in road use or installing intersections for pedestrians won't happen if your culture doesn't value those vulnerable road users. If the stakeholder organizations don't make those kind of prioritizations by the nature of their culture, and if the road user community doesn't value traffic safety enough to accept the changes that would impact them when they can no longer drive where they used to drive as freely. So I think we also need to think about this sort of the necessary conditions in society which would make us more effective with our strategies that will help us achieve our goals. And the last thought that came to mind, listening to my co-speakers, some data is available. Some data is easily accessible. Some data is a bit more ambiguous or hard to define or isn't being measured or is hard to get to. And I guess my concern is that ultimately the master plan for a sustainable traffic safety scenario, I don't think can be built on the data we have available now. I don't think we can rely on the easy data we have now. I think we need to think about the data we need and accept that it may be difficult to get it, but we will have a better plan forward once we do have that additional data. So I guess it's a call to arms to sort of think about not call to arms to find ways to get the data we actually need to make the informed decisions and track our progress at those 3 levels, the conditions, the strategy effectiveness, and the ultimate goal attainment. Thank you.
Thank you all. Before I summarize and I'm going to explain the reasoning for that, I want to ask you the next question. You know, we talk about transportations and KPIs, but in the real world, we have much more. Transportation is to bring one to the others. I go to the other place, but this is make our life easy, safe. But the quality of life or our well-being much more depend on many other things like infrastructure, good education, good school, hospital, or something to enjoy. So what would be the implication to the non-transportation sector that we should take care, again, hopefully KPI, but not necessarily KPI, but something more, even not measurable one, so that outside issue of the transportation may matter to the transportation too. So this is my second question. Before I go again one by one, I summarize what you said, what you discussed now. So for my questions, by summarizing all of you said is context matters. So in one sense, developed country and developing country are so different, and even one country, even urban or rural will be different. And then in the small community, the attachment to the community is so different. So we get to think as a systems, not thinking about the silo, but more system-oriented perspective to understand for the next step what the process should be going like. And this is important because nowadays, every day there's so many news about artificial intelligence, like OpenAI. So many of the app or many of the system says bringing the input to the output is so easy and so quick. And what is important in the future will be more like how the process should be to bring the input to the output in the way that data doesn't exist. That's one. Another is after the output, what will be the outcome that we should be aiming for? Like what kind of impact to the society we should measure, we should think. This is like the impact finance for the public. So thinking on those, the connection to the transportation to the other sector, that kind of outside contribution will be more important for the transportation people to think in their sustainable society. So not just thinking about the safety issues, not thinking about just how the road is good or not. We got to think about how the outside or non-transportation area will be connected to the transportation. And then maybe some of the KPI or index matter to the transportation, and also vice versa. So again, I go from the Lindsay, and then I think we're gonna run out of time, and we're gonna take the question from the floor after that. Linda, please.
Thank you very much, Managi-san. I think coming back to the traffic safety culture, and I think the most important thing that we can do right now is to focus on young people. They are the future. Obviously, with AI, they will be far ahead of us in terms of knowledge and technology. Therefore, it is important that we equip them with knowledge, traffic safety knowledge, and to show them the consequences of road safety issues. So curriculum in schools need to cover wider issues such as pavements, walkways, cycling lanes, personal mobility vehicles, and other road architecture. And what happens when adults who drive vehicles do not follow the traffic orders and signs? So, I mean, for instance, my sons are always telling me not to drive too fast, and my daughter is always reminding me to signal before changing lanes. And therefore, I think children can be taught to be the enforcers within families and communities, and they are the future, and therefore this is where I think the focus must be, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would like to echo what Lindsay just said about the importance of educating younger people. I mean, before talking about education, I just like to point out, what is the responsibility of the state? Of course, the roads and streets, these are the public good, and also public goods, I mean, in plural as well. But there has to be certain limitations the state can do. I mean, the people have to be responsible for our lives as well. So we have to be independent and autonomous. But how can we do this? Then the education is very important because, for instance, the AI can replace, AI and the new technologies can replace many jobs. I mean, we had many researches talking about, half of the jobs available today will disappear in 10 to 20 years, right? But there are certain jobs which remains for people, humans to do. And those are jobs that, requires the more competencies, certain competencies people need to exercise in order to fulfill the job requirements. So, often refers to like, critical thinking, communication skills, and so on and so forth. These can be cultivated by so-called inquiry-based learning. I mean, this has been done in many, many countries today, not just to try to promote the rote learning like we did in the past, but we encourage the learners to the more inquiry-based. Inquiry-based learning means, learners need to identify the problems and then try to understand why the problems happens and then explore how we can solve these problems. So this kind of inquiry-based learning can really build the certain level, cultivate the key competencies the learners need in future, particularly among the young students. And then by doing so, we don't have to, they don't have to really depend on the state so much. So we can think of, what are the roles of states and then what the roles of the people we should do. So we need to discuss about this, the different roles the state plays and then also different roles the individuals as a citizen should play. And then the education is one of the key to develop such sense. And then when we discuss about traffic culture, I mean, we should pay attention on that aspect as well. Thank you.
I think it's very important to bring in the young people here because you're right, it is the young people who are dying on our roads. And it continues and it will not stop. But I also think, and I think there's a role for education, but I also think it's very inspiring to see what, for example, been done in Sweden, where road safety education has been focusing on educating critical road users, and critical road users in the sense that the way that the road is built is not, has to be safe for me as a child. And this talks very much into child conventions and child rights and all these things, that it's not the children who have built the road outside their school, it's some adult, and it's coming from the state. And it is their responsibility to make sure that the people who live in their state are kept safe. So I think educating children and educating young people to be critical thinkers. And I think you talked to it, Nicholas, about acceptance of road culture and sort of the culture that we have and how we accept that that's how it looks. And that's where my critical thinking comes in here. And sometimes we need to illustrate the change that we would like to see. Our mobility snapshots is really a lot trying to do that, illustrate what city is it that we would like to do, and sort of pointing to it and not just say, well, it's not safe, you need to do something, but be very concrete around it. And an example is New York City, who did not really have a demand, but looked to other cities that were kept safe and wanted to reduce the number of fatalities and built cycling tracks there. And in the beginning, they were not really used, and then suddenly it exploded. And this has been a very, very popular feature to the city, and also increased the livability and people's appreciation of living in a city that has prioritized cycling paths. And then you had a point around long-time planning. And this is not coming overnight, and children are not educated and then things will happen next day. So it is really about long-term planning, and it's about having that vision for what it is you would like to see in your country, in your city, in your community, having that in mind. And then I'm a big sort of supporter of looking to other movements and make sure that we're not just working in isolation here. And just to, as you probably have already heard, I'm a big supporter of 30 kilometers an hour. And in Europe, if you look around Europe, many cities are now adapting 30-kilometer zones. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive that we are making such an impact. So I was like, oh, that's really nice that people are listening to our calls and they're listening to what we want to do. But what I also realized, maybe they are listening, but what I also realized is that there's an emission agenda. And if these countries want to meet the emission agenda and their targets that have been set for Europe, they need to reduce speed. So right there is a friend, is a climate agenda that has supported us all the way. And that was a really big learning for me, that that's very impressive that they actually managed to get that 30 kilometer an hour. And maybe it's not just us, but hopefully in partnership.
I'm glad you said the word vision. I was going to talk a bit about that in terms of the opening question. How do we make sustainable traffic safety relevant to other stakeholders? It comes down to how you describe the vision for traffic safety and sustainability. And there's an approach to system change called appreciative inquiry, a technique of thinking about how you make change to a new way of operating. And one of the key components of that is creating a vision of the future you're trying to achieve with this whole process. And how you frame that vision, how you describe that vision, will affect who's compelled to join you on the journey to that future. So if we describe the vision of sustainable traffic safety as being getting to 0 deaths, a future where no one dies on the road, that's probably going to interest mostly people around traffic safety, maybe public health. But if you instead framed the future vision as a future where everybody has the opportunity to reach their full potential, or where everybody has an equal opportunity to live a happy and healthy life, that suddenly is of interest to many more stakeholders than just traffic safety, public health, people in mental health well-being area, people with a strong focus on equity. It's a future that appeals to more people. So a key step in this process of change is creating a vision that is actually of interest to and motivates other stakeholders, what you were calling friends, to come together and help you in that whole journey.
Thank you all for responding to the wider question that I have put. My question was not clear, but thank you for this. My question is always not clear. Thank you. So now I want to take the question from the audience. And right now, in the two Zoom, I don't see any question in the Zoom side. So I want to take the question from the audience. So questioning in English, Japanese, either way fine. So can any of you please raise your hands?
I'm
Sato. Well, for the Traffic Society, thank you very much for valuable presentations. I'd like to speak in Japanese. This is not a question, but listening to you, I'd like to, talk about what I felt. Ms. Lotte talked about we need to create a society where pedestrian is safe. And I really agree with you, Lotte, especially in Japan. Well, for the elementary school children have to walk to school, so that we need to have an environment pedestrian is safe, and we don't like to have a car-free zone. But in Japan, we have a school zone for a time-limited zone for children, but that is not kept by the car drivers. And about the children, as Linda mentioned, that about traffic safety. In a school curriculum, education has to be included to educate children about the traffic safety. I think that is very important. We need to educate the children about the traffic rules and regulations. But in Japan, in Japanese society, for elementary school children, what should be done? well, we just to teach defenses, what should be done. Well, in Japan's traffic rule education, we just to teach children what they shouldn't do. And well, of course, we have to teach them rules and regulations, but we have to make them aware of what kind of risks exist, even when they follow the rules. Well, we are not paying that attention to that aspect. And when the children, when they get old, maybe children need to change the traffic safety culture. I think that kind of message has to be included in education for children, that they need to change the traffic culture and make it better in the future when they grown up. And Nicholas talked about that it's very important to believe in the achieving the zero fatalities. Of course, the vision zero, that is very appealing, and I desire for that. But about the number zero, when we think about just zero, it's rather ambiguous, not very clear. Well, maybe we cannot make progress if we just stick to zero. In an Australian video about traffic education, how many people were killed, well, last year, and to this number, well, what is acceptable level in a traffic death? That was asked in a video, and the people who asked mentioned about half of the number, and then the same number of people appeared in the room, and some of them are their family members, wives and children, and then the person was asked if you accept this traffic death, and the person said that traffic death should be zero. So we cannot just say zero. We have to think about our loved ones, families and children. If they are in the traffic casualties, can we accept that numbers? We have to think about that. And I myself, well, my daughter was killed in a traffic accident. My daughter killed in a traffic accident, and my feeling, I'd like to share it with you. I do not want to experience the same feeling, but such a feeling is very important. So I'm a victim, the position of the victims, and we shouldn't accept the traffic death. Think about the death of your family members. We have to imagine that, and thinking about that, we have to promote the traffic safety. That's what I felt. Thank you.
Very important. He said it's a comment, not a question, but anybody want to say something? Okay. Yeah, question from the back, please.
I'm of Fukuda Nihon University. I used to work in the developing countries, and the awareness or traffic safety culture is deeply dependent on the situation of each of the country. Right? So how do you think that the stage of the development of each of the country? For example, maybe in 1995, when I visited Vietnam, everybody drive the bicycle. After 2 years, changed to the automobile, the motorcycles. So people cannot catch up to such kind of the change of the mobility easily. So we have to look at the stage of the development of each country. Each country have a different situation. So do you have any ideas about this? How to change the traffic safety culture of the people and follow up the development of each of the country? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to, please?
I lived in Vietnam for 8 years, and I truly know exactly what you're talking about. I think it's quite interesting that development is associated with, for example, car ownership, and I think it's something that again comes back to the values that we all have. That it's valued to have a car, and car ownership sort of ranks very high. You have many communities around the world where cycling or walking is seen as something that the poor are doing, and not something that if you are prospering that you should do. And I think there's a big role for people like Nicholas here to help us changing those mindsets and make us understand why is it that car ownership, for example, is such a value to many communities in many countries. And it's a big question that we all are looking to. I think, for example, you see many Nordic countries where you sort of had a trend that was going up. And it's built over a long time. It's something that you sort of build a trend building up on car ownership, and then suddenly it changed, mainly because of the design of cities, and you saw that it was not very easy to use your car. It was made more cumbersome, expensive to have cars. You can do a lot of with the legislation and regulation around that. For example, it's very expensive to park it. There's a lot of taxes on car ownership, those things. That again comes with prosperity. So again, it's those who can afford it that will use it, and those who cannot afford it are also provided with opportunities of using alternative modes of transport.
Thank you very much for the questions. I mean, I actually do not have a clear answer to the question raised by Professor Fukuda, but the SDG actually, tells us a clear message that we really have to reconceptualize the concept of development. I mean, we used to, seek for the growth. I mean, we try to grow our economy and having more, but we are now trying to look at the quality of the society, quality of life, quality of development itself. So instead of having more, how to improve the quality? That's the message that SDGs have been telling us. But at the same time, it's a dilemma for us. I mean, living in developed countries, already realized so many and having more comparing to those societies, so-called developing countries. I mean, it's very difficult for me to tell people in developing countries, you shouldn't have more, But at the same time, I mean, that has to be the message we have to discuss with people in those countries as well, because otherwise, as you are very known for the research in Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand. I mean, you know how the countries have been facing so many cars having traffic jam on the streets, but at the same time, the people try to improve the situation and then try to install new public transportation systems and making some progress. That's very much the efforts people have made in that country. I mean, of course, in collaboration with the outsiders, but I think people in developing countries are also aware of the needs of changing the concept of development now. And can I just respond to the first comment in Japanese, because he made a comment in Japanese.
Well, I think that in terms of the traffic safety education, I think it had to be changed, and also, especially now for the future, I think, especially, it's not just only technique, but in addition to knowledge, I think we have the citizenship, values and education and the people's thinking, but I think we need to have the experience in both. For example, trolley problem, we have the concept of the trolley problem in philosophy. That is if you are going to be killed, if the rail workers is your family member of the problem of the trolley and choco has been discussed for dozens of years in the past. And that should be used, all the many materials should be used for the education. But in the traffic safety education, that has not been well utilized.
So for the future traffic safety education, I mentioned the inquiry-based learning I mentioned before, and inquiry-based learning have to be introduced more and more for the traffic safety education.
Other questions? Oh, you want to take? Okay.
I'd like to add to that question earlier. I work, besides, I work in the maritime sector as well, ports and shipping. And if we look at that industry, for example, it is international standards are the same throughout the world. So if you go to one port and another port, you have similar standards, similarly for shipping and so on. Now, whereas in terms of traffic planning, for instance, each country seems to have their own, plans, their own styles, road infrastructure, and so on. I think what it would be good to have would be to have shared international standards and practices and make these common throughout the world, so similar to what we do in the other industries.
Thank you. I think there's one question from the back. No? Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Shishido. I'd like to ask in Japanese. I'd like to just mention what I felt. Well, I really thank you by attending this lecture. Well, I have a visual impairment. I use white cane, and every day I walk outside and in a narrow street and a very busy road with cars. Sometimes car lane, there are a lot of car lanes. Sometimes it's very difficult to cross the road. So there are a lot of dangerous roads and streets. And still, well, for the blocks of the blinds are not installed. So rails are not installed in many places. So the infrastructure for safety is still insufficient. But the traffic safety, for each country, the concept and the policy are totally different. But when we talk about safety, safety is a key word. And safety is a common shared concept in every places. So everyone, even with visual impairment, people in wheelchairs, senior citizens, for everyone. Well, we need to create an environment everyone can walk with confidence, with a sense of safety. We need to create such a traffic safety environment. That is really a must. We need to create that. And I have a question. Before you mentioned about safety education, especially, well, you focus on safety education. Sorry, I cannot remember clearly, but about Sweden. Sweden, I heard that you conduct the safety education is conducted intensively in Sweden, and in signals, with a button for the switch, or for the switch or the buttons for the signals. So sometimes there's different sounds are used for the signals when the signals with the button where the person have to push the button to cross the street. And I hope that there should be more signal with sounds. And about safety education, intensive education, what kind of education is conducted in Sweden? If you have that information, please let me know. Sorry, I'm talked about a lot of things.
Before anyone wanna respond, I get several questions both in Japanese and English in the Zoom. So I'm gonna explain what is the question, and some of them are general questions to not indicating particularly to any of you. Some questions are indicated to the particular person. So I read one by one. So then after I read that, again, from the Linda, I will go one by one, picking about a particular one that you want to respond, okay? So if anything remain, I can take it, but probably you will answer it. So the one question is about sort of culture. So how do we measure cultures? Can we measure culture? And great to know it. But the same person said, on the other hand, disagree with Nicholas for using culture as KPI, because culture is ever evolving and many factors interact with each other. So it's not so good way. And second one will be more general questions. There are discussion about artificial intelligence or IoT. Can these help us to prevent from the traffic accident and promote for safeties? So those kind of new technology is a good, how it can be good for us. And then question in Japanese. So it's a question to the Lotte. Now that you talk about the 30 kilometers, and then over the time, the transportation is moving ahead for more lower speed. But how can we advance more in the region by regions? And then the last question is to the Yuto Kitamura-san. E-procurement, what is required for the e-procurement? So those are the questions, and we start from the Linda again.
Very much, Managi-san. Actually, I have a question for the gentleman who asked the question last. What changes do you find now that there are more electric vehicles on the road? Do you find it easier or more difficult to hear the sounds of the cars that are approaching? Because unlike combustion engines, electric vehicles are fairly silent. And how has that changed for you, if at all? Thank you.
Okay, the question is to me, I mean, the e-procurement at the schools, I mean, is more required, means, you know, in order to promote traffic safety education, we have to introduce more technologies, but how to use it, I mean, it can be various different ways. I mean, it can be more real. I mean, students can experience more real, I mean, by the, you know, by those, you know, technologies, or it can be more designed for individual needs. I mean, designed for individuals. So technology is, you know, it's not just, there are various ways to use the technologies, but one of the way we can really specify is to individualize the educational materials by using the technology. So those kind of efforts we should make more. That's the meaning I put the procurement here on the slides. And then it's not, probably Lotte will respond to the education in Sweden, but I've been also doing research on education in general in Sweden. And then in Sweden, in education sector, it's not only about traffic safety education, but in education, they are trying to cultivate a sense of ownership, and then also autonomous individuals, to making them, you know, autonomous individuals, and then encouraging them to make decisions by themselves. So this kind of educational philosophy obviously also influenced to the traffic safety education in Sweden as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and I completely agree. I think to the discussion around Sweden and their school education, one of the shortcomings of education and road safety education is often that you sort of are taught how things are, and then they're not like that at all, and therefore they don't cater for all the opportunities and all the risks that you face. But there was another question which was around how we can promote safety in regions, and I think one of the challenges that we have in our area of work in road safety is that there is nothing that is binding. There are no there's no targets or anything that every member state have signed up to. There are UN treaties that countries individually have signed up to, for example, around safety, for example, around seat belts or ABS or things in different aspects like that. But there is nothing that's binding around, for example, the 50% reduction. But what we have seen and what we can see is that often it has a trigger effect, that if one country or a couple of countries in a region are doing it, they inspire others to do it. And that kind of leadership and that kind of role modeling seems to be a very effective model. We can see it in different regions where, if you look at the map, you can see that it's often the surrounding and the neighboring countries who have similar legislation and have been inspired. So I'm a strong believer in those networks. For example, such as ADB, UNSCAP, WHO, where you're sort of putting pressure, but internally. So that's definitely one of the ways that we can promote safety in different regions.
I should probably take the traffic safety culture question. Culture is a very complex, large term. If you look at the literature that talks about culture generally, from sociology and anthropology, people talk about it in terms of what people typically do, the artifacts that a group makes, and the way a group thinks. And that's a very large, cumbersome combination of things. In fact, it's everything. If you think about culture as what people do, what people make, and what people think, there's very little left to use culture to help change. So part of our process in using traffic safety culture is to be very specific on the definition. So we are focusing just on shared beliefs and values as our definition of culture, because we want to think about culture as a tool for changing behavior. And the logic is, by understanding the shared beliefs of a culture, we can use that understanding to change the behavior that those beliefs influence. If we agree that culture is primarily focused on the shared beliefs and values, the next question is, how do we measure those when values and beliefs are inside people's heads? You then have to use tools to get that information out, either through interviewing by asking questions or developing very concise questionnaires that ask questions that reveal those values and beliefs. That whole process is very complicated and time-consuming, but it's really the only way you can get to measuring and quantifying the presence of those values and beliefs and measuring how they influence behavioral choices. So it is possible, but it's difficult to do. I'm not suggesting culture is a KPI at the sort of goal level, but I do think if ultimately we're trying to reach zero traffic fatalities as a long-term goal, we need a culture that wants that, and that believes it's possible, and that prioritizes traffic safety as an important goal for society and the groups they belong to. So I'm suggesting we measure traffic safety culture as one of those sort of process condition indicators to track how culture is changing over time, to first of all, let us explain why fatalities are changing over time. Secondly, to see how well our efforts to change culture are succeeding, and to find times when culture is particularly good, when we can try new innovative solutions, because we know society is really motivated to see behavior change and traffic safety improved. When we know that by measuring culture, that's when we can try these more innovative things, when we know society is ready for it.
Thank you. Initially, I plan to summarize everything and suggest for whole next step using 10 minutes, but I'm completely out of time, so I don't do that. And I think the fourth speaker explained very clearly, and thank you for the fourth speaker for talk and question from the audience and also from the Zoom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now closing the Q&A session, and this also brings us to the end of panel discussion. Thank you, Professor Managi, and all panelists for active participation. Please go back to your seat. Everyone, please give them another round of applause. At the end of this symposium, Nobuyuki Kawai, the International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences Executive Director, will address the closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nicholas Ward, Ms. Lotte Brandon, Ms. Linda Wells, Professor Kitamura, and Professor Managi. Those were great discussions, very insightful and inspiring. On behalf of the Secretariat of IATSS, the International Association of Traffic and Safety Sciences, and as a member of the Board of Directors of IATSS, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the panelists of today's discussions on traffic culture for sustainable society, and all the participants from the world, both attending here in person and online, along with the president of IATSS, Professor Takeuchi, Gifts Committee Chairperson, Professor Nakamura, and other supporting IATSS members for your invaluable contributions in the form of knowledge and expertise, which made this global interactive forum on traffic and safety, GIFTS in short, successful. In the last 9 years, with the concept of traffic culture as a guiding theme and paying due respect to the regional variations of mobility in the world, we have been discussing in this annual symposium GIFTS the way to improve traffic safety in the societies for better future. We know that the actual application of those universally common keywords on traffic safety, such as engineering, enforcement, and education, is not so easy because they need to be interpreted according to the perception of traffic safety in each society, which differs from country to country with their own unique cultural, historical, economic, and social backgrounds. Despite those differences, one thing is clear. Every citizen is the stakeholder of the traffic safety in whichever society one is living. Today, we learned about some initiatives which successfully involved average citizens with their deepened consciousness concerning traffic safety. Change may be initiated by governments or by academic societies like us, but real change is made person by person. The insight and inspirations coming out from the discussions today surely help us IATSS to formulate our future policy, which will be disseminated to the world next year for the occasion of its 50th anniversary and beyond. With the principle originally inspired by the founders of Honda Motor Company 50 years ago, we, the IATSS, have been pursuing our goal of making solid contributions to the realization of an ideal mobile society. Through activities such as today's symposium and working together with IATSS members, I believe we are one step closer to this goal. Thank you again, the panelists, IATSS members, and all the participants for your continuing support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kawai. Now this concludes the 9th Global Interactive Forum on Traffic and Safety. Thank you again for your participation. For the purpose of future reference, we would like to ask for your cooperation to submit a questionnaire before you leave. For all on-site participants, you can find a questionnaire in the handout. Please hand in your completed questionnaire at the collection box at the reception when you leave. The receiver may be left on the table. For all online participants, the questionnaire will appear on your device screen after this symposium ends. For all YouTube participants, please read the QR code on the screen. We are now closing the symposium. Again, thank you so much for your participants.